Chair thanks the gentleman from Illinois and recognizes himself. It strikes me that there are at least two issues at play, two major issues. Number one is the efficacy of the ARB process itself, whether or not it is in our best interest to allow any entity to essentially grade its own papers. We don't do that in any other category of life. We don't get to sentence ourselves when we're in court. We don't get to grade our own papers in a classroom. The other aspect of the efficacy of the ARB is who they interviewed and who they didn't interview, whether or not they have to accept recommendations or don't have to accept recommendations. That's a separate issue to me, is whether or not the ARB process works, whether or not it has shortcomings. The second issue is, let's assume arguendo that the ARB process works. Let's just make that assumption for the sake of argument. Is anyone following the recommendations of the ARBs? Mr. Secretary, I want to read something to you. We are disturbed at the inadequacy of resources to provide security against terrorist attacks. We are disturbed at the relative low priority accorded security concerns, and we praise the ambassador for seeking security enhancements long before the attack. Do you know what that comes from, Mr. Secretary? What I just read?
I believe it's part of the Accountability Review Board report.
From 1999. That was
Bushnell and Nairobi, correct?
That was the ARB from 1999, and you can lay it almost perfectly over what happened in Benghazi. And one other point, the 1999 ARB made it really clear. They went out of their way to make it clear. They were disappointed that the recommendations that came after the bombings in Beirut were not being implemented, something called the Inman Commission. So the 99 ARB criticizes existing State Department employees for not following the Inman Commission from 14 years prior. That is a quarter century's worth of recommendations. And yet here we sit. So what I want to do, because I honestly commend Mr. Schiff. It was a wonderful idea, and I thank each of you for coming. But giving the inescapable interconnectivity between recommendations made after Beirut and after Eastern Africa and now after Benghazi, we're going to look at some of those past ARB recommendations. And I'll give you one, Mr. Secretary. For diplomatic buildings abroad not meeting Inman, of course, Inman being, again, Beirut bombing, not meeting Inman standards, essential physical security upgrades should be made immediately. That was the recommendation of the 1999 ARB. Mr. Secretary, I'm going to read you another one. This goes to Mr. Cummings' point, which I thought was a wonderful point. Diplomatic petitions should be made to all governments with whom we have relations to remind them of their obligation to provide security for our embassy. Who in Libya were we to call? Who? Mr. Cummings' point is a wonderful point. It was so good the 1999 ARB made the recommendation. Make sure the host country is aware of its obligations. Who did we call in Libya?
Question, sir?
Yeah, when I pause, that's generally an indication I'm waiting on you to answer, but I'll make it more clear in the future.
I think this is the heart of the question. There are times when, for the national interests of the United States, we are going to have diplomats, humanitarian programs, rule of law programs, and other things in places where the host country does not have a government.
Mr. Secretary,
and in those cases, we must take the lessons from this ARB.
Was there a government in Libya for us to contact?
No, not at that time.
All right. So that recommendation of the 1999 ARB, we were not able to do. Let's move to one that perhaps we were able to do. This was also a recommendation from the 1999 ARB. And again, the ARB is presented to us as a panacea. I mean, that's the evolution of what happens, is there's an attack, there's a blue ribbon panel, we're going to study it, we're going to make recommendations, and this is never going to happen again. So back to the 1999, the Secretary of State should personally review the security situation of diplomatic facilities, closing those which are highly vulnerable and threatened. Why do you think the 1999 ARB went out of its way to use the word personally
No comment, sir.
What is the answer? Privileged? I mean, that's a recommendation from the 1999 ARB. The Secretary of State should personally review. And I'm asking you with all due respect, we're not going to get to the word review. We got to get past the word that modifies review, personally. Why did they think it was important that the Secretary of State himself or herself personally review?
I think ultimately the Secretary, who bears the responsibility for the security, has to be brought the information that is necessary for him to make decisions.
Right.
That is my job.
Okay.
I have gone to the Secretary of State on different occasions, and we have talked specifically about the security of different places. Tripoli was one of them in particular since I have been back. But we have also looked at Sana'a. We've talked about Kabul. We talked about the other locations as well. Where I have concerns about the safety and security of our personnel, and if I believe that we are not doing the things that we need to do, then it is my responsibility to bring it to the Secretary.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. Was it done on September the 10th of 2012? Was it done prior to Benghazi? Because this recommendation has existed for more than 10 years.
I was not here at that time. I'm sorry. I cannot tell you.
Well, your answer mirrors what the 1999 ARB further said, which is, first and foremost, the Secretary of State should take a personal and active role in carrying out the responsibility of ensuring the security of U.S. diplomatic personnel. Is that being done now, and was it being done prior to your tenure?
In the time that I was here previously, and I have served under multiple Secretaries of State, I have heard every secretary talk about the importance of security. Okay. I have heard every secretary state to the personnel of the department that security is their function. Their personal security has to be their function. That goes from Madeleine Albright, that goes through Secretary Clinton, Secretary Rice, and with Secretary Kerry, who has also made those statements and has made statements that the safety and security of our personnel is absolutely one of our highest priorities.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. But again, I think words have consequences and they have meaning, and most people use words intentionally. And the 1999 ARB intentionally used the words personally and active. That, to me, does not mean talking about something. A personal review is not simply talking about it. Is the personal review ongoing? Is that ARB recommendation still accepted, I guess is my question. Does the State Department still accept these recommendations from the 1999 ARB, and is it being done?
Yes. I think the best and clearest example that I can give you today is a new process that we put into place, the VPVP process, the Vital Presence Validation process, where we, again, look at what are our vital national interests and why should we be in these high-threat, highest locations. We put this process up, and it goes all the way to the Secretary.
All right, and that is a great point, which leads very nicely into the next point I was going to make or ask you about. What is it about that recommendation that is so talismanic that it couldn't have been made prior to the attack in Benghazi?
I think the Department of State has practiced risk management from the day that
with risk management being, we're going to weigh the risk of being somewhere with the benefits of being somewhere. We know the risk of being in Benghazi. Can you tell us what our policy was in Libya that overcame those risks? In other words, why were we there?
These questions, I think, have been fundamental to the department for over 30 years. It is the reason why in many places we have evacuated, or we have shut down operations, or we've taken our families out, or we've gone down to essential personnel only, or we've asked for Marines to come in and support us while we're there.
Right, and my point being, Mr. Secretary, none of that was done in Benghazi. So we know the risk in Benghazi. My colleagues and you and others have done a wonderful job of highlighting some of the tripwires, I think is the diplomatic term. What policy were we pursuing in Libya that was so great that it overcame all of the tripwires and all of the risk?
Not being here at the time, sir, I cannot answer that question for you. I do believe, personally, from my time at the United Nations, that many of us understood that if we lost the eastern half of Libya, that if we lost the confidence of the people after the revolution in Libya, that we were going to pay a terrible price. And I don't want to put words into Chris Stevens' mouths. I think he was an immensely talented diplomat, and I was not here at that time. But I think it was clear in Chris's mind why he needed to go to Benghazi and what he was trying to accomplish. I think today we have more formalized processes to make sure that those decisions are documented. The VP process makes us go through a process that I don't think was there prior to Benghazi. I think the results of the Accountability Review Board and the Best Practices Panel and the recommendations that we've accepted ensure that as we go forward, we've got a clearer, more precise, more mandated process for risk management. But I would tell you, sir, that every single day for the years that I was with the Department of State, we were weighing the safety and security of our personnel versus what our national security priorities were. And I think that's a fundamental tenet that you will find that everybody in the department agrees with.
Well, I appreciate you bringing the hearing towards its conclusion back to Chris Stevens and back to the other 4 who lost their lives. But Mr. Stevens was equally clear that he needed help. He was equally clear that the situation was getting worse in Benghazi. He was equally clear in asking the people who sent him there to represent us to provide adequate security, and none was forthcoming. With that, I would recognize the ranking member for his closing remarks.
What's the penalty for crossing a border unlawfully?
I would defer to the Department of Justice on any.
Well, let's try it this way. Who has exclusive jurisdiction over immigration cases?
Again, it's outside of my lane, but I would say it's CBP or ICE.
So it'd be federal. It's exclusively federal.
Yes, sir.
Both, and they're really, unless you can think of something I can't think of, it's either crossing a border unlawfully or overstaying a visa would be about the only ways you could get in the country unlawfully. Only 2 ways I can think of. You either cross one of our territorial boundaries or you're invited in and you overstay your visa. And those are both exclusively federal. But I think you'll agree with me that almost all of our interactions in life are with state and local law enforcement. It's not an FBI agent who stops us for speeding. It's not an ATF agent who is working the bar scene. So if most of our citizen police encounters are state and local, and yet immigration is exclusively federal, how are the federal officers supposed to know about folks who are not here lawfully?
Sir, the Department of Homeland Security has the PEP program, which I am not at liberty to speak on. But I would say if Congress passed a law that commandeered every local police officer and wanted to pay for that, then I think we would welcome it.
When you say, well, commandeer is such a pejorative word, how about we just say cooperate? I mean, you don't commandeer people for your terrorism task forces, do you? You don't commandeer people for your narcotics task forces, do you? It's called cooperation. And yet you have a policy that says that New Orleans Police Department members shall not make inquiries into an individual's immigration status. What do you mean by inquiries?
Sir, if there's a criminal in New Orleans and an officer interacts with that person and there's a criminal warrant, that person
See, I don't know what you mean by criminal. You mean if the person has, if there's probable cause to believe that an offense was committed, or if there's already an outstanding warrant?
If there's a state, federal, or local warrant or probable cause that an officer observes conduct that's criminal, they will arrest the person.
All right, and then they can inquire as to the person's status.
Our officers under this policy do not inquire about a person's immigration status.
They can or cannot?
Under this policy, they do not inquire about a person's immigration status.
Why not?
Because we believe that, one, this follows federal law, and two...
How are the federal law enforcement officers supposed to know who is here unlawfully if your officers don't inquire? They're not the ones that are interacting with them. They're not enforcing traffic laws. They don't respond to domestic violence calls. The FBI doesn't have jurisdiction over that. That would be your state and local officers. So how is that supposed to happen?
Sir, I think your concerns are with the broader system and not with this policy. In New Orleans, we arrest every criminal that we interact with. We bring them to the jail.
I love the way you phrase that. You arrest every criminal you interact with. They're only a criminal after they've had a jury trial, Mr. Butterworth. They're a suspect up until that point.
Correct.
Mr. Horowitz, if their original policy was okay, why did they revise it?
I don't know the answer to that question, Mr. Chairman. You'd have to ask the Civil Rights Division.
Well, you're a good lawyer, Mr. Horowitz. If the original contract was fine, you usually don't draft another one unless you just love paying lawyers. I mean, if your original indictment was okay, did you have a superseding indictment?
Generally not.
No, you don't. So if the original policy is fine, why did we get this brand new policy?
Well, obviously, our memorandum outlining the concerns we had about the provision that then existed may well have triggered the revisions.
I hate to be cynical, but I think you're right. Ms. Gupta, you said you were a prosecutor. There was a question I got way back in time that I never really had a good answer for. Whenever a family member who had lost a loved one to an act of violence to someone who was out on bond would ask me, why was that person out of jail? I never really had a good answer. I mean, you can cite the Constitution that you're really entitled to bond absent some circumstances, but that's kind of a hollow explanation. So what would the explanation be to those who have lost loved ones to violent crime for people who are here unlawfully and the federal government knows it?
There is, for somebody who's been accused of a violent crime, the NOPD is absolutely entitled and in its authority to prosecute to the law to the fullest. And there's nothing in this policy.
You're either missing my point inadvertently or you're missing my point intentionally. I realize you prosecute people after the homicide. I'm trying to figure out how to prevent the homicide. What is the explanation for why the person wasn't dealt with before the murder?
Well, let me just again make clear that the reason we undertook the policy was to ensure that NOPD could fight violent crime, could get the kind of critical information from victims and witnesses who need to share critical crime information with the NOPD in order to solve and prevent violent crime in that jurisdiction. Well, Ms.
Gupta, you and I both know that we rely on all sorts of witnesses, some of whom, frankly, expose themselves to criminal liability in the process of cooperating. So the notion that you have to give amnesty to people before they will cooperate with law enforcement has not been my experience. But Attorney General Landry, I'm out of time. You asked the question, how do you answer it when family members ask you, why was this person not dealt with before they committed the act of violence? I never really had a good answer to that one.
Unfortunately, I've had to answer that question in Louisiana here lately. And the best way I answer them is that our system in this country is broken.
Secretary Clinton said there was nothing marked classified on her emails either sent or received. Was that true?
That's not true. There were a small number of portion markings on, I think, 3 of the documents.
Secretary Clinton said I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material. Was that true?
There was classified material emailed.
That was Congressman Trey Gowdy, and that was back in July, that exchange, looking for clarification on what was found on Hillary Clinton's private email server and the emails that traversed it. Clinton is trying to move on from this issue, and it looked like she could do that. But over the past week or so, it has become increasingly clear that she cannot. She also tried to downplay this AP report that came out that claimed that half of her non-government meetings when she was Secretary of State were with people who had made donations, and sizable donations at that, to the Clinton Foundation.
I know there's a lot of smoke and there's no fire. This AP report, put it in context. It excludes nearly 2,000 meetings I had with world leaders, plus countless other meetings with U.S. government officials when I was Secretary of State. It looked at a small portion of my time.
House Oversight Committee member Trey Gowdy joins us now. Good morning, sir. Good to have you back on the program. She says it's smoke, but there is no fire here. Your thoughts?
No, it's arson. It's pyromania. It's not smoke. Even listening to her talk about the Clinton Foundation, I couldn't help but go back and remember the press conference she gave on her emails, Martha, where every single thing she said proved to be false. That's the interesting thing about credibility and believability. You can't just keep it in one compartment. When you are a habitual serial liar in this facet of life, it tends to make people not believe you in other facets of life. So when she's talking about the Clinton Foundation, I go back and remember her saying there's no classified information. I only use one device. I did it for convenience, all of which were proven to be false.
Yeah. Well, one of the big questions here, she said she separated out the personal emails. But one thing we don't have a definitive answer to is whether or not she considered foundation business to be personal. So did she dump all of the foundation-related emails with the yoga and the wedding plans?
Well, Martha, you just put your finger on the, not the $1 million question, the $100 million question. I'm sure she's going to have a press conference later this afternoon or whenever she has the next one. I hope somebody in your line of work will ask her, did you consider foundation emails to be personal or work-related? I have yet to see a single foundation email produced by the State Department that was sent by her. Yeah. So if she considered them to be personal, then we move into the facet where she and her lawyers had those emails deleted. And they didn't just push the delete button. They had them deleted where even God can't read them. They were using something called BleachBit. You don't use BleachBit for yoga emails or for bridesmaids emails. When you're using BleachBit, it is something you really do not want the world to see. So I hope someone in your line of work will ask her, did you consider foundation emails to be personal or work?
All right, the other area that I want to get into with you is this FBI interview, because every time we bring this up on this program, we get a lot of response from our viewers. People want to understand how she was able to testify. It was long awaited, this testimony, this moment when the FBI would get to sit down at a table and ask her directly the questions that they wanted the answers to, because we know that James Comey said, this isn't an inquiry, as she said. He said, this is an investigation. All right, so let's assume it's an investigation. You looked at the notes from the investigation, and what can you tell us about what you learned?
Well, I read every word of all of the witness interviews yesterday. And Martha, I'll tell you up front, there's no reason you should not be able to read a summary of that interview that I read yesterday. You and your viewers should be able to read everything that I read yesterday that related to the FBI investigation. There's no reason you should not. My takeaway was this. Remember, James Comey said she was not indicted because he didn't have sufficient evidence on the issue of intent. I didn't see any questions on the issue of intent. There's no question she handled them negligently or extremely carelessly. He said he didn't go forward with charges because she didn't have specific criminal intent. I didn't see any questions on that.
All right,
she said she did it for convenience, but I didn't see the follow-up questions in the interview I read.
All right, so James Comey was not in the room during this questioning, correct? That's your understanding?
Says he wasn't.
All right, so he says he wasn't in the room. Do we know how many FBI agents were in the room questioning her?
3 or 4, and there were some DOJ lawyers also in the room, and of course her lawyers were in the room.
All right, so as an attorney, if you wanted to ascertain whether or not anyone had intent to influence something or an action or someone, what kind of questions would you have asked? You say there were no questions that went to the issue of whether or not she had intent. What would you have asked?
Well, there are 2 ways to do it. One is circumstantial evidence. The other is direct evidence. The direct evidence would be, Madam Secretary, why did you set up this email server this way? Why did you not take a state.gov email address? And her response was, and it always has been, convenience. And then that's when you press and say, well, what could be more convenient than just doing a state.gov email address? The labyrinthine effort that you made to create this separate server, that's what's inconvenient. I would then ask, why did you delete emails that you kept for 1.5 years? Keep in mind, these personal emails, she didn't bother to delete them for 1.5 years. It was the fall of 2014, 1.5 years after she left the State Department, that she decided to start deleting emails. Why didn't you delete them the month you left? Why didn't you delete them 6 months after you left? And the other question they should have asked her is, Madam Secretary, why didn't you turn your emails over the day you left service?
We got to leave it there.
Why did you hold on to them for almost 2 years?
We are out of time. Congressman, thank you. We will be right back.
Yes, ma'am.
Breaking tonight, Hillary Clinton under mounting pressure tonight from the left and the right to shut the doors of her Clinton Foundation once and for all. And tonight, the Clintons are fighting back. Big time. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. 24 hours ago, we brought you a stunning report from the Associated Press suggesting Hillary Clinton held many meetings with Clinton Foundation donors while she was supposed to be doing the American people's business. The AP found that of the 154 people from private interests who met or had phone conversations with then Secretary of State Clinton, more than half, or 85 of them, gave money to her foundation, the Clinton Foundation, for a combined total of $156 million. The Clinton campaign quickly hitting back, saying this report is flawed. And earlier today at a campaign stop, former President Bill Clinton chimed in. Watch.
We're trying to do good things. If there's something wrong with creating jobs and saving lives, I don't know what it is. And the people who gave the money knew exactly what they were doing. And I have nothing to say about it. I'm really proud. I'm proud of what they've done.
We begin tonight with our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge, reporting from Washington. Catherine?
Megyn, tonight the Associated Press is standing its ground after Hillary Clinton's team tried and failed to get a correction. The Clinton campaign complained on the morning shows that this AP tweet was unfair, not accurate, and based on limited information.
By our count, there were over 1,700 other meetings that she had. You know, she was Secretary of State. She was meeting with foreign officials and government officials constantly. So to pull all of them out of the equation, cherry pick a very small number of meetings is pretty outrageous.
And the White House defended Clinton, telling reporters that even before she became Secretary of State, there was a transparency agreement.
To ensure that the ethics requirements that are in place went above and beyond those guidelines that are set by law.
But the Associated Press says their reporting is based on documents released by a federal court after they had to sue the State Department, and it took 3 years for the AP to get the Clinton schedules that showed the foundation donors. And it made sense to analyze meetings outside her regular government duties as secretary. Quote, this reporting was done by the same AP investigative team that discovered Mrs. Clinton's private email server and whose reporting last week resulted in the resignation of Donald Trump's top campaign strategist. Megyn?
Catherine Herridge, thank you. In just a few moments, we're going to speak with Congressman Trey Gowdy, who just got back from Capitol Hill, where he personally reviewed some of the FBI's documents from its investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email server. He'll tell us what he found. But first, we are joined by Roland Martin, host and managing editor of TV One's News One Now. Roland, great to have you on the program. Thank you for being here.
Great to be here.
So what do you make of this, of the Clinton Foundation? As we're just looking through the publications today, USA Today, Boston Globe, New York Post, Detroit News, Daily Beast, all saying this thing ought to be shut down at a minimum if she wins.
Well, first and foremost, if she wins the presidency, you will have her as president. You will have former President Bill Clinton serving as first husband, if you will. I do believe what they should do is transition out of business because even though they've done phenomenal work, you're now the commander-in-chief. You're now the leader of the free world. And so, look, I sit on a group of 50 CAN education group, Students First. We merge transferred assets. And so you can do that. You can partner with an existing NGO to do the work.
But do you think it's shady
you can't
now?
Have a
what do you think of the existence of it now? Laura Ingraham was on Fox earlier calling the Clinton Foundation a machine for influence peddling. She's suggesting that they use it. They use it to sort of, to get donations. They use her power as Secretary of State to sort of convince people to donate to their foundation.
Well, first of all, I would disagree with that because let's keep in mind she's a former First Lady. She's a former United States Senator. I think she probably has a hell of a lot more relationships, even if she wasn't Secretary of State. And the reality is the work that they're doing as an NGO across the world is critically important. You have President Jimmy Carter, who probably comes closest to having his own organization that does work around the world. It's very rare to, frankly, have a former president that has this type of entity. So I would say Laura is absolutely wrong. She certainly has an axe to grind here. I don't. The bottom line is here. They do good work. But I do believe what the Clinton folks have to understand understand is it's not simply just a question of what took place in meetings. It's also the appearance. And so I think one of the things that they should do, and they really should do this, they should say after Labor Day, they are going to suspend accepting any funds into the foundation because you're in the middle of a presidential campaign. I believe be far more proactive as opposed to reactive. That's what the Clintons should be doing.
Roland, do you like her? I know that you're a big supporter of President Obama's. What do you think of her?
I've met her. She's a nice woman. I've been critical of her, just like I've been critical of the president. Last time I interviewed him was 7 years ago, so it's not like we've been buddy-buddy. But again, just like anybody who's in political office, you know, I have a very simple philosophy, Megan. If you do good, I'll talk about you. If you do bad, I'll talk about you. At the end of the day, I'll talk about you.
Before I let you go, because that was a great sign-off, but I have to ask you, are you open-minded to Donald Trump?
Here's the deal. I have interviewed a significant number of African Americans, and I have been asking the exact same question over and over and over. Where is your plan? Look, I voted for Republicans before, so this ain't the first time. I look at individuals, but the problem for me is this here. Donald Trump gives great comments. It's on a bumper sticker, but there's no specificity. There's no plans. And then when he keeps saying stuff that you come back and say, wait a minute, that's not true. I got a problem when you simply, as somebody running for office, cannot even tell me how you're going to pay for your tax plan. You don't talk about HBCUs. You talk about African Americans, but then where's your plan? I'm sorry. He's all hat, no cattle. That's what we say in my native Texas.
Roland, great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Likewise. Thanks a lot.
Joining us now in a Kelly File exclusive, South Carolina Congressman Trey Gowdy, the former chairman of the Select Committee on Benghazi. Great to see you, sir. So today you had an interesting day taking a look at some documents that the FBI had prior to you getting a look at them. Did you find anything particularly interesting about these documents that Hillary provided the FBI?
Yes, ma'am. Keep in mind, one notebook were the classified emails that she handled so negligently. The other notebook are the witness interviews, the summaries, what we call 302s. My number one takeaway, Megan, is there's no reason in the world you could not and should not be able to look at the same witness interviews that I had to go to Washington and look at in a classified setting. You and your viewers should be able to read summaries of these witness interviews. The second takeaway is a lot of the FBI's time and attention was spent debunking and refuting these fantastically false statements that Secretary Clinton made at the inception of this email story. And the third takeaway, remember, Director Comey said that he could not indict, did not have a realistic probability of a successful prosecution on the issue of intent. So I looked to see what witnesses were questioned on the issue of intent, including her, and I didn't see that many questions.
Let's go back to number two.
Issue.
Let's go back to the second point, which is how much time they had to spend debunking what you say were lies or falsehoods that she told. What do you mean by that?
Oh, even something as seemingly innocuous as us referring to Sidney Blumenthal as her advisor. Remember, she got really upset when we used that term. You'll never guess which term the FBI used when they described Sidney Blumenthal and his relationship to her. He was interviewed. I think you would find very interesting what Colin Powell had to say and juxtapose that with what Clinton supporters have said over the last 48 hours. You go back, the multiple devices, how many phones she had, the very reason she set it up. All of that proved to be fantastically
and I want
false.
to ask you this. So she also, of course, claimed that she never sent or received classified information. We now know that that's not true. I know you thought it might be interesting if the American people could see who sent some of the emails that she received with the classified information. What do you mean by that? Why would that be so interesting?
Well, right now, even Congress can't see the identities of them. They are so classified that even a congressman in a skiff with no telephone, no iPad, no notes, cannot even see who the author or the originator of that email string was. That is how classified that information was that she was handling on a non-secure server. Mm-hmm. So Sidney Blumenthal is one author. Of course, you know Cheryl Mills and Numa Abedin and Jake Sullivan, but there are even some originators that even members of Congress cannot see the identity of them because of the nature of the information.
Mm-hmm. But meanwhile, she was saying, I had no idea. No, what classified? No, I had no. Congressman Trey Gowdy, great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Also tonight, new reason for Hillary Clinton to be very concerned about a potential October surprise. The fugitive founder of the controversial group WikiLeaks is here in an exclusive interview on the information he holds and what it may mean for Mrs. Clinton. Don't miss Julian Assange. You know, right now, according to the average of all polls, she's beating Donald Trump by 5.5 points nationwide. She's way ahead of him in most of the swing states, not all. Do you believe the information in your possession could be a game changer in the U.S. election?
From Greenville, South Carolina, is House Oversight Committee member Trey Gowdy. Congressman, thanks for being here.
Yes, sir.
I want to get your thoughts on these developing stories, then we'll talk about the debate tomorrow night. First of all, we get this document dump on Friday night. Tons of different pieces of the different interviews the FBI conducted. One of them, Brian Pagliano. This is the IT guy who handled the server for Hillary Clinton. And he essentially says that there was some sort of cover-up. And that he mentioned this. Take a listen to questioning of Robbie Mook today.
We learned from the FBI that an IT contractor managing Hillary Clinton's private email server made reference to the, quote, Hillary cover-up operation in a work ticket. This IT worker certainly sounded like he thought he was covering something up, no?
FBI Director Comey came out and said to the world that there was no case here, that they did not have evidence of wrongdoing on Hillary's part.
So what's the Hillary cover-up operation that the IT worker was referring to?
But this is the perfect example of what's going on here. The Republicans in the House side are selectively leaking documents for the purpose of making Hillary look bad.
Congressman, your reaction to all this?
Well, there was a cover-up, and the folks who aided and abetted that cover-up is the State Department. I mean, keep in mind, Brett, she had this arrangement for the entire time she was Secretary of the State. Then she kept her emails for almost 2 years, and it was only because a congressional committee would not go away that the State Department bothered to ask her to return the public record. And then that's when it gets interesting. The conversations between Cheryl Mills and Patrick Kennedy, and then Platte River, and then we send a subpoena, and Platte River destroys documents after the subpoena. The State Department, which is supposed to be apolitical, not interested in the next presidential election, has been covering for Hillary Clinton since she left office.
Well, what about the Department of Justice offering this at least partial immunity, but immunity through the FBI to 5 different people, one of them, Cheryl Mills, the former chief of staff of Hillary Clinton? For a lot of people who looked at this, they just don't get that.
Yeah, and I would be one of them who don't get it for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you think that there is evidence that is relevant to an investigation on a piece of physical property, you use a subpoena, a grand jury subpoena. You don't strike an immunity agreement with the computer. You go get the computer. Her lawyer, Beth Wilkinson, who, by the way, represents both Heather Samuelson and Cheryl Mills, she's on record as saying the Department of Justice assured me my clients did nothing wrong. Well, people who have done nothing wrong typically don't ask for immunity. So my question would be, immunity from what? What was it that you were worried about the FBI finding on those computers? And Brett, I'll tell you what I think it is. She had classified information on those computers. So you offer immunity to Cheryl Mills, who has classified information on her computer. How can you possibly then prosecute Hillary Clinton for having classified information on her computer? You couldn't do it.
So are you saying, Congressman, that there was no intention at the beginning to prosecute Hillary Clinton, no matter what happened?
Well, I don't want to malign the FBI, but I can tell you this. I have been underwhelmed by an agency that I once had tremendous respect for, and it's the Department of Justice who gives out immunity agreements, not the FBI. The FBI doesn't immunize anyone. But the Department of Justice, the same department that is headed by someone who met on a tarmac for half an hour to discuss golf and grandkids with a potential witness,
with a potential witness, to say nothing about being the spouse of a target, a potential witness in an investigation. She recuses herself. Someone in the Department of Justice had to decide to pass out these immunity agreements. And I see the get out of jail free cards, Brett. What I don't see is the jail. Usually you strike immunity agreements to further a prosecution. There is no prosecution. It's just 5 get-out-of-jail-free cards.
All right, I want to ask you about the president, and he factors into this document dump. Here's what he said back in March 7th.
Mr. President, when did you first learn that Hillary Clinton used an email system outside the U.S. government for official business while she was Secretary of State?
At the same time, everybody else learned it through news reports.
Now, there's an email in this document dump that Uma Abedin notes that the president could only receive emails from approved addresses. She recounted when Clinton changed her primary email address, they had to notify the White House so Clinton's emails would not be rejected by the server. Uma Abedin, was not sure how often Clinton emailed the president. Abedin was shown an email chain dated June 28, 2012 with the subject regarding congratulations. Abedin did not recognize the name of the sender. Once informed that the sender's name is believed to be a pseudonym used by the president, Abedin exclaimed, "How is this not classified?" Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Brad, I read that a couple of weeks ago when I read the FBI's file. This is about the 4th or 5th time the president has said something, that he learned something from a media report, whether it was the IRS targeting scandal or whether it's this. He's got really poor people staffing him if he has to rely on you and others in the media to tell him that Hillary Clinton was using her own private email. He emailed with her. It wasn't just once. It was more than once. And the other defense I've heard is, well, there was the letter H. Well, that's fine, but what you didn't see is state.gov. And that's what you ought to see if you're getting an official email. The one question that's never been asked of Secretary Clinton that I would love to ask if I were in your line of work is, would you have had this arrangement had you beat President Obama? Had you won in 2008?
Yeah, now that brings me to my last point. This debate tomorrow night, she likely will get asked some kind of question like this, we would think. If not, it'll be raised by Donald Trump. You've evolved on Donald Trump. You supported Marco Rubio. You said Donald Trump didn't have specifics back in February. Does he have specifics now? And what do you think about tomorrow night?
He has some specifics, but you know, Brett, this is really not a policy presidential race. This is about the anger and frustration that my fellow Americans feel with those of us who have been in politics, and Secretary Clinton's been in it for a long time. The way I look at it, I was a Marco Rubio supporter, so I'll quote him. The choice is between someone I don't agree with on everything or someone I don't agree with on anything. And between the two, I'm going to pick the person I don't agree with on everything.
Congressman Gowdy, thanks for the time.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Top Republicans want to know why emails were deleted from Hillary Clinton's private server after an order was given to turn those emails over. Now, there are several witnesses, including the man who infamously destroyed some of Clinton's phones with a hammer, called to testify tomorrow morning. Trey Gowdy says there is a lot for which they need to answer.
She had her lawyers, not government lawyers. Not government, her lawyers went through and decided what you can see and what you cannot see. And even then, they missed about 15,000. And at the end of all of that, they decided to apply a product called bleach bit. Not the delete button, but a hammer and bleach bit to what they claim are yoga emails. It doesn't pass the laugh test.
So Jason Chaffetz, chairman of the House Oversight Reform Committee, with me now. And sir, good morning to you and welcome back to America's Newsroom. Who's going to show? I saw your list. I think there were 5 on there. Who shows up?
There are 5. Well, we expect them to all show up. We have enlisted the United States Marshals to help deliver 3 subpoenas. We expect them to show up tomorrow morning. Evidently, according to some news reports, 2 of them have been granted immunity by the FBI, so I'd expect them to sing like songbirds. I don't know that they will, but they should. They've gotten immunity. Why not come and testify and tell the whole truth?
What do you want to know?
Well, this is one of the largest breaches of security in the history of the State Department. We have literally tens of thousands of federal records that are still in question. Some of them are so sensitive in their nature, so classified, that they will people can die if people were to read this, the adversaries. So we want to know why, after preservation orders, after subpoena, these documents were destroyed, and who directed them. Trey Gowdy talks about the trigger man that actually did use the bleach bit and smashing BlackBerries, but these are more privates, low-level folks who took direction from somebody. I don't think they just made that up and decided one day, hey, let's go ahead and do this. But they did speak with Cheryl Mills. They did speak with David Kendall, and we'd like to have them tell us who directed the destruction of these federal records.
To be clear, the timeline, March of 2015, right? So we're going back a year and a half, correct?
Yeah.
And there was a preservation order that went out from Congress, and it was after that order was released in the same month that all the emails were deleted. Is that correct?
Well, you can't destroy federal records, period, but more than roughly 2 years after Hillary Clinton leaves office, suddenly there is another preservation order. There's a subpoena. There's a statement by Hillary Clinton, I believe on March 10th, saying that she had preserved everything. And then suddenly you had this conference call between Clinton attorneys and Platte River Networks. And then less than a week later, this stuff is destroyed. And so you can't destroy stuff that's under a subpoena. You just can't do that.
Now, I guess they could take the fifth, right? Even if they have immunity, right? I mean, they don't have to answer your questions.
It is their constitutional right, but given that they have immunity, at least two of them evidently, I would expect them to tell us everything, but we'll see.
Elijah Cummings on that committee, Democrat, said the following: "This is the first time during my 20 years in Congress that I have witnessed the oversight power this committee used in such a transparently political manner to directly influence a presidential election." And you say?
I didn't pick this timeline. Hillary Clinton picked this timeline. And shame on us if we don't follow up on the destruction of federal records. She's the one that did this, not me. It was the Inspector General that gave the criminal referral to the FBI, and it was the FBI director who said he never looked at what Hillary Clinton said under testimony. And I also, we'll enter into the record a CRS report, a Congressional Research Service report, and some letters from Democrats who did the exact same thing when it was Republicans they were going after. So Elijah Cummings' memory, he's a good man. I really like him, but memory's a little short on that one.
Do you still trust the FBI director? Do you have confidence in James Comey?
Well, I appreciate the documents that he's given us, but tonight we have a hearing because they've only released to the public the selected some of the unclassified documents. Why aren't all the unclassified documents out there at some point? They won't even let Congress see the unclassified report at this point. So Mr. Comey has been the one person who spent hours before a committee answering questions, but when he says, and I believe him at his word, they never looked at Hillary Clinton's testimony under oath, we in the House of Representatives have got to stand up for ourselves and do our own investigation. That's what is checks and balances. That is what oversight is. So we'll march on.
Well, I did not hear a yes or no in your answer there. It seemed like a maybe, or you're in some sort of gray territory.
Well, we're the Oversight Committee. You trust but verify. And so I don't believe he's acting necessarily in a political way. I want to see everything that those FBI agents came up with. I want to see if they did issue subpoenas. Did they record any of these things? Did they use all the tools that they have at the FBI to truly get to the bottom of this? But we also have a duty as a separate branch of government to do our own investigation. That's exactly what I'm going to do.
One final question. Is there an update you can give our viewers today on the investigation of the possibility of perjury when Hillary Clinton appeared in 2015?
Well, we have asked the Department of Justice to dive into this, but as we gather all the facts, we're going to see where those facts take us. And so this is part of that process. We're going to have a series of hearings of this, regardless of the presidential election. I shouldn't go any faster and I shouldn't go any slower because we have a presidential election. I have a duty and a responsibility. And did she or did she not lie under oath? There's a lot of evidence already that says, yes, she did lie under oath. I mean, my concern with Hillary Clinton is she continues to look into the camera, even when she raises her right hand and swears to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and lies. And that's a deep concern.
You're saying you believe she lied under oath?
Yeah, I think clearly. I mean, you just look at our individual statements. We even asked, Trey Gowdy asked the FBI director, quoted those items, and he said, no, that wasn't true. Now, we want the Department of Justice to look at it. We're going to look at all of the people, the destruction of the evidence, the destruction of the BlackBerries, the destruction of these laptops. I mean, somebody put a laptop in the mail, and they don't know where it is? I mean, come on. This is not a three-ring circus that they're putting it out to be.
I'm out of time today. Thank you for yours. 10 a.m. hearing tomorrow,
Thanks, Bill.
Eastern Time. Thank you. Jason Chaffetz there live on the Hill. Thanks.
Get this question. You are opposed to immigration of persons south of the border coming to the U.S.
No, that's absolutely not true. I
Well,
support
let me
legal
ask-
immigration,
well, let-
not illegal immigration.
Well, let me ask you this question. You realize that we have been struggling with comprehensive immigration reform for many years in this country, and it is politics that keeps us from doing it, correct?
No, I think
So
that
you don't think it's politics?
I think that it's enforcement of the law. You may be dealing it
Well,
from a
I mean, we're
political
talking
issue.
about changing the law so that we can have comprehensive immigration reform, but you are opposed to us doing that, correct?
The process, and I'll
Are you
share
opposed to us considering comprehensive
in the order that
immigration
you're doing it, yes.
Okay,
That the
because you
border needs
prefer
to be
that there
secured
needs to be
first,
border-
and then you can address that issue after.
All right, and that's a Republican position, Republican Party position, and you're a Republican, and I understand that. Let me ask you this question. Do you need automatic weapons to help you with border control?
We have in Arizona through the chair
If you could say yes or no, and then you could explain.
semi-automatic weapons.
Do you need automatic weapons?
We don't have to have automatic weapons, no.
Do you need mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles to help you patrol the border?
Not for the border, but for our SWAT team, yes.
Thank you. Do you need silencers in order to help you patrol the border?
For our SWAT team, that's a tactical move, but it's not necessarily targeted
Why does
for
your SWAT
smuggling.
team need mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles?
Because, sir, through the chair, our county doesn't have the money to buy a SWAT vehicle.
Why do you need it in order to enforce border security? Why do you need a mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle?
And this is where...
Thank you. And do you need...
No, sir. Sheriff, you may answer the question. You cannot ask a question and then not allow the witness to answer it.
Mr.
Sheriff,
Chairman,
you
I
may
wanted a
answer.
yes or no answer. He answered the question, and I'm ready to move on.
Sheriff, have you
Now,
answered the
someone-
question as completely as you would like to?
Mr. Chairman, I'm
The
ready
gentleman
to
is
move
not
on.
recognized. Sheriff, have you answered the question as completely as you would like to?
And this is where us in
Mr.
law
Chairman,
enforcement...
regular order, please. Regular order.
In law enforcement, we have
Point of
420,000 residents of my county, and we are the SWAT team for
Point of
all
information,
13
Mr.
law
Chairman.
enforcement agencies. And for high-risk warrants, barricade
Chairman.
situations, almost never have we used
Chairman.
an armored vehicle for anything to
Point
do
of order.
with illegal immigration, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Sheriff. The gentleman is out of time. If you have another question,
I have a point of order that I'd like to
state your
raise.
point of order.
Is it within the rules of this committee that the chairman can interrupt a legislator asking a question of a witness?
If that
Take
legislator
that
is not
legislator's
allowing a
time?
witness to answer a question, you daggum right he can. Yes,
Well,
sir. The
I
gentleman
take-
is out of
I
time.
take exception to the chairman's
The chair would now
abuse
recognize
of
the gentleman
authority
from Iowa,
as
Mr. King.
chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.